you're writing literary fiction or memoir, you might have found that writing a sex scene is one of the hardest things you've had to do. Why are you struggling so much with this? One of the problems is that you think a sex scene is about sex, when actually that's not the case. More on this coming up. My name is Wendy Dale. I'm a Random House author and the founder of Memoir Writing for Geniuses. Okay, let's start by taking a look at a sex scene. Seconds later, I'm on my feet because Grady has picked me up. My arm is around his shoulder and his arm is around my waist, and I'm pressed up against him. I look up at him and he's looking down at me, and I've never seen him from this angle before. I can feel his sinewy muscles tensing through the Henley shirt and jacket. I can feel him holding his breath. I can see his jaw tighten, his nostrils flare. Even if the sun was shining, I don't think I'd be able to read his face right now. But I swear, the crackling fire is not the source of the heat I feel between us. This surreal moment stretches into eternity and back again, as I realize I am silently begging him to kiss me. Okay, so how do you feel about that sex scene? Well, I would say to you that it's not very literary. So this kind of scene can work really great in commercial fiction. And in this case, this scene that I just read to you is from the book The Billionaire is Back. So if you put that very same scene into a literary novel or into your memoir, the problem is that it's going to have the effect of cheapening your writing. Well, when you're writing about attraction or sex or love in a romance novel, you do it very differently than you would in a literary novel or than you would in a memoir. So, how do you solve this? How do you write a literary sex scene? I'm going to give you some tips in this video. First of all, I'm going to read you a literary sex scene. So this is from Leaving Brooklyn, and I just want you to notice the difference between this scene and the one I read to you. I had never seen a man's body except in pictures, yet that was no great surprise. It seemed something I'd known all along, just as I'd known how to touch him. What I hadn't had any inkling of was the immeasurable tactile reality of bodies. Suddenly the world was matter, not words. People were their bodies, not minds incidentally occupying flesh. The only other time I'd been so aware of humanity as pliable flesh was the first aid course in junior high. The luscious manic weeks we bandaged each other, rolling through the spring with graying rags and gauze, giddy with the feel of flesh. But that was long ago and fleeting. I still thought knowledge could be licked off a page. Daily life was a chore to be endured while the spirit waited, at one remove, to return to my vivid, nourishing reality, in bed with a book in my lap. What I was doing now, though, was what was being done to me, was as vivid and insistent as any book, and gave the same relief of arrival at a resting place, a bedrock reality. It was even like a book, with new passages rolling through me rhythmically, each bearing its multitude of sensations while I followed along, captive and heroine, feaster and feaster, through infinitely opening spaces and elongated time. Every instant held more than seemed possible, unveiled more of the life hidden behind edges, the most startling revelation being that whole dramas could be performed in which the mind had barely any part. And as if I were turning pages with the rapt expectation of something glorious and astonishing at the end, this too tantalized. I was consumed with curiosity, yet wanted it to last and not reveal its ending too soon. Just as in bed I needed all of my powers of will, not to peek ahead and spoil the last page by hastening it. Though I did not know pleasure in the common sense that first time. That was beside the point. It could wait till later, when I was not so bedazzled. I knew only the solitary pleasure of seeing beneath the surface. Okay, don't be intimidated by that. You don't have to write a literary sex scene that goes as deep as this one, right? But I wanted to give you an example. I wanted a stark contrast to the first scene I read to you. So how is this scene different than the first one? Well, the first thing I want you to notice is that the goal of this scene is not to titillate. In the first scene, it's sinewy biceps and wanting him to kiss me. But here, that's not the case. So I'm not trying to turn my reader on, right? So that's what romance novels do. That's what pornography does. But literary fiction and memoir is not made to turn someone on. Now, there are really good reasons to include a sex scene or multiple sex scenes in your book. But you want to be really careful that you don't cross that line into pornography. So, first thing I want you to remember is that a sex scene in literary fiction or in memoir is not meant to titillate. So, what is it supposed to do? Well, one of the things that I want you to notice is that it adds a lot of insight. Here, we learn actually so much about the main character. We understand that she loves books, right? And here she's comparing sex to what she's known her whole life. She compares it to reading a book. So instead of titillating us, we get insight into who the narrator is. What you want to do is you want to find that insight even when writing a sex scene. So, the next thing I want you to keep in mind, and this is probably more helpful than be insightful because that's difficult to do. How do I become insightful? How do I write down insight on the page? That is a difficult thing to apply. So, if that isn't helpful to you, let me give you a more practical tip. And that is this: think in terms of what makes this time having sex different than any other. The first passage I read was really generic. If I had changed the name, it wouldn't have made any difference. That moment of attraction could be felt with anyone, right? And so I just have to change the name, and it sort of is a stand-in generic scene. Now, that's not what you want to do at all with literary fiction or with a memoir. What you want to do instead is think of what makes this moment different. Why is this time having sex different than any other time? So, first of all, the question you want to ask yourself is, why am I doing this? Why am I having sex with this person? And if you think sex is because you're in love with that person and that's the only reason people have sex with one another, I think you need to think again. So, I suggest that what you do before you start writing a scene is to think about what makes this moment of having sex different than any other. So, let me give you an example of this. In this case, the narrator is having sex because he wants to be accepted in American culture. Let me show you what I mean. So, this is from the novel Everything I Never Told You. He set himself a curriculum of studying American culture, listening to the radio, reading comics, saving his pocket money for double features, learning the rules of new board games in case anyone ever said, "Hey, did you hear Red Skelton yesterday?" or "Want to play Monopoly?" Though no one ever did. As he got older, he did not attend the dances or the pep rallies or the junior or senior proms. At best, girls smiled silently at him in the hallways. At worst, they stared as he passed, and he heard their snickers as he turned the corner. So that fall in 1957, when Marilyn had leaned over his desk and kissed him, this beautiful honey-haired girl, when she came into his arms and then into his bed, James could not quite believe it. The first afternoon they spent together in his tiny whitewashed studio apartment, he marveled at how her body fit so perfectly against his. Her nose nestled exactly into the hollow between his collarbones. Her cheek curved to match the side of his neck, as if they were two halves of a mold. He had studied her with the air of a sculptor, tracing the contours of her hips and calves, his fingertips grazing her skin. When they made love, her hair came alive. It darkened from golden wheat to amber. It kinked and curled like a fiddlehead fern. It amazed him that he could have such an effect on anyone. As she dozed in his arms, her hair slowly relaxed, and when she woke, it had stretched back to its usual waves. Then her easy laugh sparkled in that white, bare room. As she chattered, breathless, her hands fluttered until he caught them in his, and they lay warm and still, like resting birds. And then she pulled him to her again. It was as if America herself was taking him in. It was too much love. Okay, so the reason for having sex is that he wants to be accepted in American culture. That is expressed throughout this scene. He basically says that this woman he's in love with, or this woman he's having sex with, is amber waves of grain. Did you catch that? Let me point this out to you. When they made love, her hair came alive. It darkened from golden wheat to amber. And then a little bit later, and when she woke, it had stretched back to its usual waves. I mean, he uses the words amber waves of grain or amber waves of wheat in this description of making love to this woman, right? So here what I want you to take away from this is before you write a sex scene, ask yourself, how is this moment different? How is this moment of having sex with this particular person different than any other time? What I see is that people tend to fall back on physical sensations, right? And so they think, well, it's a sex scene, so I'm going to describe him touching my face and describe his sinewy biceps and describe what I feel, what it feels like to have his hand graze my leg. The problem with that is it tends to create generic sex scenes, right? So what happens is you could exchange this person for any other Tom, Dick, or Sarah that you've had sex with in the past. You just change the name, and now the sex scene works. And that is not what you want to do with memoir or literary fiction. You want this to be not as much about physical sensations as much as living through this with you, the emotional experience. And I'm not saying love, right? I'm not saying that you have to pretend that you're in love with this person if that's not the case. What I'm saying is I want to feel like I'm there with you. I want to be inside your head. So as a reader, I know what the physical sensation of having sex is like. It's pretty much the same no matter who you're having sex with, that sensation, right? And that's what pornography does. It tries to titillate. But as a memoir writer, as a writer of literary fiction, that's not what you're trying to do. You're not trying to titillate. You're trying to put us there with you. I'm going to give you my last tip and my last writing sample in just a second. Before I do, be sure to sign up for my free 7-part class on how to create structure in your memoir. You'll find the link in the description below this video. Okay, tip number 3. The narrator's thoughts are more important than physical sensations. I kind of was getting into that a second ago, but here I really want to talk about that. So the act of having sex, the physical sensation is pretty much the same. What makes each sexual act different is what you're thinking at the time. So let me give you an example of this. So this is from Art and Madness, a memoir of lust without reason. And what I want you to notice is that we don't have any heavy breathing. We don't have any hearts pounding. This is all inside the narrator's head. And that is how to write a literary sex scene. That is how to write a great sex scene for a memoir. Outside of the men's room, behind a potted plant with Christmas bulbs wrapped around it, we kiss, and I am as happy as I have ever been. The bones of my corset are piercing my chest. I worry that the chaperones will see us. I worry that my date is looking for me. I worry that I will never learn to inhale a cigarette without coughing. I think of Forever Amber. Do you see how thus far this is all about the narrator's thoughts? So it's a kissing scene, but we don't have any soft lips and tongues, and it's all what is going on inside the narrator's head. And notice also that this is what makes this moment different than any other person she's ever kissed. Okay, I'll keep reading. I think of Forever Amber, dresses ripped with passion. I don't think of madness. I think of dancing on tables, of watching the moon sink over the Mediterranean Sea. And I think of genius, the wonder of it, the daring of it, the anti-golf course of it, the anti-financial sheet of it, the anti-day after day of it, the pleasure of crashing a small plane into the rough Atlantic seas. I think I am blessed by Jack's clear eyes, not warm eyes, not loving eyes, but eyes that see in the dark, devil's eyes. Lucky me. The kissing is fine, but the conquest is better. He pulls out a small thermos of scotch and offers me some. It tastes terrible. I pretend to like it. I go off to find my date, my boring date. My life is determined. So why is this moment of attraction different than any other in her life? Well, it's that she's doing something wrong. She ends this scene with, my life is determined, right? And so she's doing something wrong. Why is she doing this? She's doing this to rebel. She doesn't like the life that she's headed into, all of the rules that have been set up for her. So these are the things I want you to remember when it comes to writing a sex scene. First of all, sex scenes are not supposed to titillate. That's not your goal here. Instead, what you want to do is make this scene unique. Think about why the sex scene is different, why this moment in time is different than any other time you've had sex. Or if you're writing fiction, why this scene is different than any other time your character has had sex, right? So, what makes this different? Third, I want you to put us inside your head. What are you thinking at the time? Because that also is very different each time that you have sex. So, doing these three things will take what could otherwise be a really generic sex scene, the kind that goes in a romance novel, and will turn your sex scenes into something literary. I hope this helps you when it comes to writing literary sex scenes. If you would like some tips on how to instantly make your prose better, I suggest you watch this video. Take care, guys.